Hello and welcome to the BucketLister Podcast. Join your host Keith Crockford, along with special guests who have travelled the world, here to share stories of their adventures and plenty of inspo to add to your bucket list. Now, let's get into today's episode.
Hello everyone and welcome to this episode of the BucketLister Podcast. I am your host Keith Crockford and today I'm back with another of our FAQ series. And last week we started this with Kilimanjaro and I went through all of the most frequently asked questions that I get asked and we get asked in the office at the Bucket List Company about Kilimanjaro. And I thought what I would do is I would make this series and go through a lot of our trips, doing a Q&A, FAQ style podcast to answer the most commonly asked questions. And this week I am moving on to Everest Base Camp, which is probably one of our most popular treks along with Kilimanjaro. And it's the one we probably send the most people out on each year. It's what we started doing. It's what we are known for. And we have a great success rate on both Kilimanjaro and Everest Base Camp. So I'll crack on today with Everest Base Camp and go through those most commonly asked questions in the FAQs that we get asked in the office. So the first question that always comes up is, what is the best time to trek to Everest Base Camp? Now, there are two answers for this question, one in terms of weather and the other in terms of actually what you want to see. The trekking season in Nepal has two seasons. You have the spring, so from March to May, and then you have post-monsoon then from late September through to kind of November, early December time. So those are the times to go and do it. I certainly wouldn't advise going and doing it in the monsoon season, in the summer months. So from June through to August. And we would run all our trips normally around the March to May, and then late September, early October through to kind of November is when we kind of run our trips. So that's the best time from a weather perspective. But then you've also got to think about what's actually happening and what you want to go and see when you get to Everest Base Camp. Now, if you want to see Everest Base Camp in its full glory with tents and set up as a base camp, then the majority of people will always summit Everest in the spring season. So if you want to go and see the city that evolves at base camp with tents and everything, then you certainly don't want to be going in the autumn season because very few people summit Everest in the autumn. So you'll definitely want to go in the springtime if that's what you want to go and see. Obviously, after the monsoon season, after the rains, like when you get there in the autumn season, obviously it's a little bit quieter in terms of obviously not everyone's going up to base camp to climb Everest. But also because of the rains, everything becomes very lush and green in kind of late September, early October. So those are the times to go. And then depending on what you want to go and see is when you should choose when you want to go in, have your Everest Base Camp trek. So that ticks off that question. The next question is, how long does it take to trek to Everest Base Camp? And this one is a difficult one, really, because obviously a lot of people, an Everest Base Camp trek is a long trek. With your flights and everything, you're generally looking around an 18-day trip. Now, for a lot of people, that's a lot of time off work. So people kind of, can I do it shorter? Can I? And the simple answer to that really, and to be safe, is no, you can't do it any shorter. The standard Everest Base Camp trek is 13 days. But obviously then you're going to be traveling from the UK or wherever you're flying from to get to Kathmandu. So there's another couple of days. And then you're going to want a couple of days either side in Kathmandu of your trip as well. So that's basically why the trip ends up being a 17 to 18 day trip. So a standard Everest Base Camp trek is 13 days. That includes the acclimatization days. And I certainly wouldn't be looking to skip and cut the trek short from an acclimatization perspective. So that is the length of an Everest Base Camp trek. And if you want to do an Everest Base Camp trek, then really you need to allow for that time, in essence. If you want to go to Nepal and do a shorter trek, there are other options. An Annapurna base camp trek comes in shorter, a Langtang trek comes in shorter. But if you want to head up to the Everest region, then you need to be allowing that amount of time for a trip, really. What is the distance of an Everest Base Camp trek? We get asked, how long am I going to be walking each day? So the standard Everest Base Camp trek up and back from Lukla is approximately 130 kilometers or 80 miles. And, obviously an Everest Base Camp trek is an out and back trek. You basically go up the same way as you come back. So from that, obviously, you've got a couple of acclimatization days in there as well, where you will be doing some short walks if you're with us to acclimatize on those days, one in Namche and one in Dingboche. But from that 130 kilometers, you can kind of work out your average trekking each day, which is obviously slightly longer as you're coming back down. So on the way up, you're looking at kind of anywhere between sort of 8 and 10 kilometers a day trekking, which although, doesn't seem that much at the altitude and with some of the steep climbs that you've got to do, it's not as easy as that number might suggest. How fit do you need to be to do the trek? Well, as I've always said in all of these things, the fitter you are, the more you are going to enjoy it. Everest Base Camp, along with Kilimanjaro, isn't technical. It is a multi-day trek. You don't need any special skills or anything to get up to Everest Base Camp. You can literally put one foot in front of the other. But the fitter you are, the more you are going to enjoy it. We've had people rock up for an Everest Base Camp trek who have done no training whatsoever, and they've still managed to do it, but they've probably struggled a little bit more than they should have done. So the fitter you are before you go, the better physical condition you're in, the better you've looked after yourself and you're properly hydrated and you're in peak condition as you can be, the more you are then going to enjoy it. But, like I said, it is just putting one foot in front of the other for 13 days. And that's the hard bit for most people. Like, I think anybody listening to this podcast could go out and walk 8 kilometers in a day. But the difference being is can you do that day after day after day at altitude? So just have a think about that in your training and planning before you trek. And, you can easily get into shape if you start doing some training a good sort of 3 months before you trek. You don't need to be booking a trek in physical peak condition. You can work towards that as you as the trip gets closer. So another question we get asked lots in the Bucket List Company office is, what can I expect in terms of altitude sickness? Now, I always say to people that people think of the word altitude sickness and it probably gets bandied around far too much. I always say to people that, everybody on the trip is probably going to suffer from an effect of being at altitude. And a lot of people then think that having that effect of being at altitude is then actually altitude sickness. And that's not quite the case. So, feeling nauseous, losing your appetite, having a headache, those are all effects of being at altitude. That's not altitude sickness. And that's just your body coping with being at altitude. So, as I always say to people, if you do a Machu Picchu trek, for example, you leave Lima at sea level and you fly up to Cusco at 3,300 meters and you get off the plane and you feel lightheaded and you're very short of breath. You haven't got altitude sickness. You've just got an effect of being at altitude. And it takes a while then for the body to adapt. And that's what you're doing when you're on any trek. Now, the altitude profile of an Everest Base Camp trek is a very good one. You're only gaining kind of 500 meters a day. Like I say, there's 2 acclimatization days in the itinerary. So there should be no reason why your body doesn't acclimatize at the right rate on the trek. If you're eating properly, drinking properly, if you're taking it steady, you're not rushing, And if you're on a guided trip, they will make sure that you are going at a pace that allows your body to acclimatize. And for some people, they think, why am I walking so slow? I walk a lot quicker than this. And it's not, the reason that they're doing that is to allow your body to acclimatize. So just listen to the advice of the guides that are taking you, because they will make sure that you are trekking at the right speed. Obviously, if you're on a group trip, so if you come with us, we might have 10, 12, 14 people on the trek. We will have multiple guides. The group can be split up. So actually, even if you don't want to walk at the pace set by the guide at the front, you can walk at your own pace at the back and still have someone with you, and that's all fine. So don't worry about that. But yeah, that's my advice for altitude. Obviously, again, what we're advising people to do now is go to somewhere like the Altitude Centre in London, and get tested before you go. So it tells you how your body is going to react at altitude. And that's really, really important, I think, because, if we get a lot of people who go, I feel sick, I've got a headache. But it could be a number of reasons why you feel sick or you've got a headache. You could be dehydrated. It could be anything. And immediately people think, I'm struggling with the altitude. But if you've already been and had your body tested, and you know full well that actually my body will cope fine at those altitudes, it just takes that one thing out of your mind that you then don't need to worry about while you're on the trek. And you can make sure that, if you do have a headache, well, actually, is it because I'm dehydrated or is it something else? What gear do I need to take kit list wise for an Everest Base Camp trek? Obviously, we provide you with a kit list. I've also recorded a video on YouTube where I literally go through packing my bag for an Everest Base Camp trek. And I'll put links to that video in the show notes for this. So if you're listening to this and you want to have a look at the sort of things you need to pack, then, you can watch that video prior to going. Obviously, essential items are a sleeping bag, a good pair of walking boots or a pair of walking shoes. I do Everest Base Camp in a pair of approach shoes. I find that, I use the La Sportiva GTX4 mids, TX4 mids, that have got slightly more ankle support on them, but still feels like I'm wearing a pair of boots. They're just very light. And at the end of the day, you don't feel like you've had your feet in stiff walking boots all day. But plenty of people do it in approach shoes. The last section to base camp is quite rocky. And I just find that actually having a bit more ankle support there is better for me. Again, obviously layers are super important. You could be starting off in Lukla and shorts and t-shirt, but obviously you're not going to be wearing that when you get to Everest Base Camp. So having sets of layers that you can add to and take away to make sure, your body is at the right temperature is really important. Good set of rain gear. Obviously, being in the mountains, being at those heights, we can never guarantee dry weather right the way through. So you need a good set of weather gear as well. What else can you need to take with you? Like I said, a sleeping bag. You'll be staying in the tea houses. The tea houses do have blankets, but I wouldn't use the blanket as my first thing. I sometimes use the blanket over my sleeping bag. But, again, think about what you're taking with a sleeping bag, because, again, down in Lukla and in the lower levels, it's going to be a lot warmer than it is up in Gorik Shep. So actually, do you want to be too warm in your sleeping bag when you're lower down, or do you want to put a sleeping bag liner in further up to add to it so you're comfortable at every stage? So those are things to think about with regards to your sleeping bag. Obviously, there is a weight limit on the flight to get to Lukla. And the weight limit is 15 kilos between your duffel bag and your day pack. So what you pack needs to fit into 15 kilos. There are a few tips and tricks to get round it. Things like you don't get weighed. It's only your day pack and your duffel bag that get weighed. Obviously, your duffel bag is carried by the porters. and you will carry your day pack. But, having your battery pack in your pocket, having your camera around your neck when you get on the plane is all ways of kind of reducing the weight down that's in your day pack and in your duffel bag, making sure you've got your boots on, making sure you've got your heavy down coat on when you get on the plane. So actually it's not being weighed in. So those are a few things you can do. Also as well, a lot of the kit you can hire. If you want, if you don't have a sleeping bag, you can hire it when you get into Kathmandu. You can literally buy everything you could possibly ever need for trekking in Kathmandu as well. There are lots of shops that do dodgy North Face or Arc'teryx or, but the kit's, really good for a really cheap price. So if you are short of anything, you can also get it when you're out there or rent it as well. And other options are rental in the UK. So RAB have a hire service where you can basically go and get an Everest Base Camp pack. And then you can hire your sleeping bag and your down jacket and everything from them. So if you're only ever going to do the trek once, then don't go out and buy gear that you're just going to throw away. It might be better off thinking about hiring the gear in the first instance. Another question we get asked is, do I need a guide or a porter for the trek? And there was some talk last year before about how the Nepalese were bringing it in that you had to have a guide. Although they tried, it never kind of really took off. So you can still go and do Everest Base Camp by yourself if you want to. If you want to carry your own gear and whatever, you can do that. But I always say, like, if you're going in a really busy time, like having a local guide with you, you're learning more about the culture and the environment, but B, dealing with the logistics of everything. If you're flying from Ramchak and your plane gets cancelled, having someone on the ground who can support you is really, is money worth spending, to be honest. Or you could be stuck in Ramchak for a long time waiting. Obviously, again, having a porter to carry your duffel bag is, just a weight off your shoulders, should we say. And it depends how you want to do it. But I also think as well about how, you're also then supporting the local economy. You're employing local people for that time. And, you can find a guide or a porter easily in Lukla when you arrive if you want to do the trip that way yourself. But also as well, like, if you're trekking in the really busy times, like the tea houses do fill up. And again, having a guide there to make sure you've got a bed to sleep in, especially like in Gorik Shep, where bed spaces are very short anyway. Having all that already sorted is a bit of a godsend, if you like. So you do need permits for Everest Base Camp. And you can get these in Kathmandu. Obviously, if you are using a trekking company, they will have already sorted all this out for you. So there's 2 permits that you need. You need your TIMS card, which is your Trekkers Information Management System card. And then you need your national park entry permit as well. So those are the 2 things that you need to be able to trek to Everest Base Camp. But like I said, you can get those in Kathmandu. But if you've already booked your trip with a tour company like the Bucket List Company, then we'll have already got pictures of you and had that already sorted for you anyway. What's the accommodation facilities on the trek? We get asked that a lot. Obviously, like I'd said just a minute ago, you will be staying in what they call a tea house, which is basically a basic lodge, guest house, bunkhouse kind of style. And in each of the villages you go along, they will have tea houses for you to stay. Some of them are better than others in terms of the facilities. But basically, you will have your 3 meals a day in a tea house. There is basic sleeping facilities where there are twin beds in a room, and that's pretty much all there is. There is a door, 2 beds, and generally a space to put your bags. Some of them will have further down, like towards Lukla, you tend to get better facilities. Obviously, everything has to be carried up to build one of these lodges the same way that you're trekking. There are no roads or no jeeps to drive anything. All the building materials have to be carried up. So the fancier lodges with the ensuite bathrooms tend to be at the start of the trek or at the end of the trek. As you get closer up towards Everest Base Camp, then they are more basic. Like I say, you might, in some of the first tea houses you stay in, you might have a shower in your room and a toilet, but further up, you certainly won't have that. The tea houses generally do have showers. Some of them will be free further down. Some of them you'll have to pay for. And it's generally a few pounds to have a hot shower. And likewise, just further down, you'll be able to charge your phones, etc. But the higher up you go, because everything's on solar power, they will be charging you to charge your phones. One quick tip there, though, is that if you are kind of in Dingboche or Namche and you go into one of the coffee shops or the bars, if you generally go in and buy a coffee or you get a drink in the bar in Namche, they will have charging points at the bar where you can plug your phones and stuff in for free. So think about that. If you're popping out to go and grab a coffee, take your phone with you and your charger and charge it while you're in the cafe. Then you don't need to pay the tea house then to charge your phone. Tea houses will also sell snacks. They'll also sell bottled water, but as you go up the climb, the water gets more expensive. We always advise our clients to take a water to go bottle with them. That way you can just fill it up from any tap, and it will save you an absolute fortune on buying water whilst you're on the trek. Coming on to food then, and that's one of, all people always want to know what the food's like on a trip. And the lovely thing I always think about an Everest Base Camp trek is that you can actually choose your food off a menu every day. And they will have Nepali food, but there will also be some Western options in there as well. So, no matter how you're feeling, you can normally always get something that you want to eat, because you know what it's like when you're out trekking or you don't feel very well and you just want something to eat. And on the Everest Base Camp trek, you can choose what you have at each meal stop, so you're getting what you want. And I think that makes a huge difference to people. The menus between tea houses are all very, very similar. It's pretty much the same menu everywhere you go. And after 13 days, you're kind of a little bit bored of it. But you do get fed really, really well on an Everest Base Camp trek in terms of that. If you love your food and then you want to eat loads, then I would always recommend going for the dalbat in the evening. If you order the dalbat, then you could basically end up with as many refills as you want, and they'll just keep topping your plate up. Because that's what they cook for the porters and the guides as well to eat. So they always have that on the go. So, but if you ordered something more Western, for example, like a pizza, let's say, they're not going to cook you any more of that. But if you're one of those people that really, really like eating, then go for the dalbat, and then you can literally keep topping it up, and they'll just keep coming around and refilling your bowls up as well. Snacks wise, again, there are plenty of little shops on the way up for you to replenish snacks and things like that. You don't really need to bring anything from the UK. You can get everything in Kathmandu. And obviously, again, thinking about weight on the plane, you don't want to have a bag full of sweets that's weighing a fortune when you can sort of get a few things as you go up. So just think about that in terms of your weight wise, really. You can stock up and get a can of Coke or whatever. Final question then we get asked is, can I fly from Kathmandu to Lukla? And this is a really difficult one because there are still a few flights going from Kathmandu, but during the main busy season, all flights are going from Ramchap. And that's a 4.5 hour drive from Kathmandu to get to Ramchap. And there's lots of chat on Facebook and the web of people. And like I say, there are a few flights that leave from Kathmandu, but generally all flights are going from Ramchap. And the ones that are leaving from Kathmandu are generally if a plane needs to go back to be serviced in Kathmandu. And then it starts its journey again and goes between Ramchap and Lukla. But the chances are, if you're flying in peak season, either in the spring or autumn, then you will need to be heading down to Ramchap to get your flight. It's not great. And like I say, it's not the best of drives, although they have improved the road slightly. But one thing I will say is what we've done with our clients now at the Bucket List Company is we leave and stay the night in Ramchap and then get up in the morning ready for our flight early. What a lot of companies are doing are kind of leaving at 2-3 o'clock in the morning, driving down to get the morning flight in Ramchap. And of course, then you probably haven't slept very much. And then you've got to start your trek, which is something that I've done it once and it wasn't great. So that's why we changed it at the Bucket List Company to be that we would drive down the afternoon before, stay overnight in Ramchap, and then be there ready and have breakfast and be a bit more leisurely before we start the trek, because otherwise it's just a really early start and not a great way to start your trek. So if you are doing a Everest Base Camp trek, just have a look at that and how the company you're using are dealing with that start at the start, and see if you can tweak it as well to maybe stay in Ramchap the night before, because I think it's a much, much better way of doing it. Anyway, those are all the questions that we get asked at the Bucket List Company. I mean, there are other questions as well, obviously, but those are the most common ones that we get asked. And hopefully, if you're thinking about Everest Base Camp or you've booked an Everest Base Camp trek, then those questions answered will kind of help you as you go. I hope you found this episode interesting and you're finding these FAQs interesting, because I think it's really important just to kind of get the answers to what everyone's thinking out there. But I'll be back with another episode next week where I'll be doing the same thing with Machu Picchu and talking about the most frequently asked questions for Machu Picchu. Before I sign off, though, can I just ask you to do one quick thing before you leave your podcast app? If you could please go on and give this podcast a 5-star rating, I would really, really appreciate it, because it does wonders for the world of the algorithms for podcasts and more people listening to it. So if you found this episode interesting, informative, and you've enjoyed it, if you could just pop over and give it a quick 5-star review, then I would really, really appreciate it. But that's it from me. I'm currently in Gozo scuba diving on one of our scuba diving trips. So I'm just about to go and get back in the water and do another dive. But until next week, I'll be back again with another episode. Thanks very much. Goodbye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the BucketLister Podcast. Be sure to click follow to be alerted for next week's episode. For more travel inspiration, check us out at www.thebucketlistcompany.co.uk or follow us on socials. See you next time.